Rodeo Drive from Hollywood here in Guatemala City, an Eiffel Tower named after a president of Guatemala. All this and more next on the Northern Triangle. For many years, Guatemala City only offered the international airport. Many travelers that would come down here to Central America would stay at the area's hotels, and the very next day they would travel off to the World UNESCO site of Antigua or further out to Panahancho and the famous Lake Atitlan. There's lots to offer here in Guatemala City, and we're going to explore what they have to offer. Come along with me. Guatemala City, with a metropolitan population approaching 3 million residents, is on the move. The country's motto, Land of Eternal Springs, reflects in its youthful population. It's noisy, busy, and the full spectrum of humanity is on display. My team and I are walking through the relatively new Paseo Cayela, high on a hillside that overlooks the capital. Paseo Cayela is the new high-end, open-concept housing community for those with money to burn. Paseo reflects the best in ecological building practices, incorporating high density, sustainability, and of course, recognition to the architectural elements that clearly defines the capital city. I won't sugarcoat the obvious, and that is, here in Guatemala, there is a grossly out of proportion semblance of wealth to income inequality. There's poverty everywhere in the city, then there's downright misery. Guatemala is still, indeed, a dangerous country, but there appears to be a growing consensus for international businesses and commerce to pivot away from the Far East and help build a better future for all of its residents with employment opportunities here in the city. And I am seeing a lot of that. Paseo Cayela is a project that began almost 20 years ago. When done, years into the future, this new housing development will encompass an area greater than New York City's Central Park. 4- and 5-star hotels, upscale restaurants, a university campus, and everything in between, and it's all with underground parking. There's security and surveillance, which is second to none. Even though we had permits to film here this morning, we were stopped at least 3 times, and that was within the first 25 minutes by security. The biggest criticism the locals have here about Paseo is the stratospheric price range and high-end luxury stores that exist alongside the housing. The overwhelming majority of Guatemalans will never be able to afford a house or a condo here in this development, but the trade-off is a significant body of future property tax collections as more units come online. The city government does function, and with the tax revenues increasing each year from Paseo Cayela, those funds can and are being distributed to provide infrastructure, including a new light rail under development to connect the opposite ends of the city, educational and other indirect support, especially within those outer zones here in the city that continue to suffer from the effects of chronic poverty. Look closely at the statue of the giant there with the key in his hand. It's rising out of the ground, and it's a relatively new art installation. Affectionately known as the Cayela Giant, this sculpture is 54 feet long, 10 feet high, and it's carved from beige marble, and it's designed and made from the sculptor Walter Brenner. Represents the man coming out of the ground, holding the bronze key in his right hand, and it's the largest carved sculpture in Guatemala, having been inaugurated in 2014. This giant is one of the more popular tourist attractions in Guatemala. It has become the setting for many selfies. The sculpture is an allegory of the pursuit of happiness. It is based on a story written by the sculptor himself, which takes place right here in Cayela. The story tells how a girl saves the book with the scroll, and after many years, her grandchildren decipher the way to wake up the giant, who emerges from the earth to give them the keys to happiness. This event happens after the children have practiced the virtues of justice, temperance, fortitude, and tolerance, something that has significant meaning here in the country. As I mentioned earlier, the key holds the significance with education, and many people share with me, those who are fortunate to go to school know clearly that the way out of poverty is an education. Which seems to me just the opposite back home in the States, where after high school, college education includes taking out massive loans, all but locking in a lifetime of paying off those loans. As I wrap up my cloudy, foggy morning here at Paseo, I return to the city core towards a historic landmark. I'm told there's a miniature version of what looks like the Eiffel Tower, so that's where we're heading to. Less than 2 miles from Calleja lies this historic landmark. Originally built in the United States in 1934, the Reformer Tower was transported and assembled in Guatemala City a year later. The 210-foot steel tower originally had a bell placed at the top, but since then, a radio light tower acts to keep air traffic on their final glide path to the nearby La Aurora International Airport. Commissioned to celebrate former Guatemalan President Justo's barriers and his attempts at creating a Central American Union, the tower continues to be a beacon for miles around. There is no restaurant here, but not far away is a brand new revolving restaurant that serves up some incredible views and cuisine at the newly opened Giratoria Revolving Restaurant atop Hotel Kinsey. With spectacular views, one is sure to find exceptional meals and service here. In Central America, there are many parts that are dangerous, just as there are many safe areas. There's poverty, and then there's dangerous. Please note that the two are not synonymous. Let's start with the question that I receive consistently, and that is, how safe is it to travel to Central America, and in particular Guatemala? There are too many variables that are at work here to give a simplified answer. I will make the assumption that most who are inquiring are from the tourist point of view. There are multiple views of safety depending on the prism through which one interprets violence, security, and of course pre- and post-COVID. I sometimes say that there are days when I feel more safe in Guatemala City than I do right in my own neighborhood back in the States. In my mind, from a tourist point of view, if one follows a few simple steps, traveling to Guatemala City can be a very safe and of course enjoyable experience, including traveling out to different regions around the country, such as Panahancho, Atitlan, and Flores, which is the jumping off point for tourists to visit the Mayan ruins of Tikal and Yacha National Park. Leave the jewelry at home, dress in cotton for layers and comfort, and don't go wandering outside your hotel at night unless you're using rideshare apps. Overall crime pre-COVID was on a downward slide, and the current COVID cycle produced an additional artificial bump downwards. People were basically limiting their social distancing, remaining indoors, and certainly staying inside during the nights. It remains to be seen, post-COVID, what direction crime and the essential data provides for in the future. What I do notice a lot is a very visible security presence complete with rifles. For the first-time visitor, don't be alarmed at seeing these guards with the firearms. They're everywhere, and at first it can be daunting, but truth be told, it is something from a safety perspective that we should have been doing back in the States years ago. I feel exceptionally safe when I enter a store, a shopping mall, bank, gas station, hotel, and I see these armed guards. They are there to protect you, the citizen, and the tourists alike. Honestly, you just don't see mass shootings here. I generally nod, acknowledge them, and move on. It's important to note that when you enter another country, you are now a citizen of that country. You are no longer a citizen of your home country. Respect the laws. More importantly, respect the culture, carry yourself quietly, and promote yourself as an ally supporting the citizens, and you'll be guaranteed to have a safe and most certainly memorable visit. Guatemalans in general have a strong sense of family values, morals, and clearly embellish these traits in their everyday life. Don't be afraid to say hi to them. They'll most certainly say hi back to you, and of course be prepared for the occasional impromptu English session. There are many different areas within Guatemala City that are now experiencing gentrification. It's a renaissance of sorts. The city is expanding horizontally, but there are limits in place due to the surrounding hillside and the topography. Commercial and residential building heights are limited due to the significant presence of underground limestone formations and, of course, the seismic activities. Each month, it seems as if a new condo development is breaking ground or a new commercial mid-rise is being placed. Be aware that when you're walking, acknowledge the sidewalks. It's strange, but in short, put the smartphone away. When you're walking, it can wait. Live in the moment and be aware of your surroundings for safety purposes. Otherwise, you're bound to trip and experience a very hard fall. The country is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, and as a result, there is significant seismic activity. With that, there's also plenty of adrenaline-induced junkie opportunities, which range from swimming in cenotes, ziplining, to even walking the slopes of active volcanoes. Periodically, ash from the eruptions does blow into the city and shuts down the airport. Guatemala City is the third relocation of the capital due to periodic earthquakes and/or some very significant destructive volcanic activity. The Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography was first established in 1898, but has been relocated several times, each to a larger facility, with its present location here since 1946. With over 20,000 artifacts, as you can guess, many of these represent the various Mayan nationalities in the broad-based Yucatec languages, which includes almost 30 different Mayan dialects and languages. The different Mayan populations are still present, albeit they're somewhat smaller. Their communities range from modern-day Belize on the Yucatan Peninsula all the way down to the southern tip of Guatemala and into El Salvador. Perhaps the most famous of these ancient city-states are to be found at Tikal, about an hour's flight on a national Guatemalan TAG Airlines. Here, Tikal rose to prominence beginning roughly in the year 2000 BC and lasting until 900 AD, before its population eventually collapsed. There is certainly no shortage of amazing museums right here in the city. Recently, a new museum called the Miraflores Museum opened. The whole of modern-day Guatemala City lies on a plain that was initially settled by the Camino Huju Mayan population. They lived primarily from 1500 BC, flourishing up until about 1200 AD. Over a millennia later, with the advent of the Spanish conquistadors and, of course, multiple volcanic eruptions, the grounds were eventually buried and laid in ruins, including what you see here. Not too long ago, many of the mounds were excavated here, as well as in other locations a few miles away. This particular ceremonial altar was not only excavated, but also preserved and then recovered up. This museum is one of two housing artifacts excavated from the Camino Huju Mayan complex. Camino Hujus is the only Mayan active archaeological site in the department state of Guatemala, which houses its capital city right here. What I like about this particular museum is that the entrance hall has a map of the ancient city set into the floor, overlaid with glass, marked with the streets of modern Guatemala City to show the vastness of the Camino Huju Empire. Museum pieces come from here, as well as the larger active archaeological site located just a few miles north. After enjoying exploring what the Miraflores Museum Complex has to offer, head right next door to the appropriately named Miraflores Shopping Mall. This shopping mall is one of three citywide triple Class A impressive shopping malls. And in this case, it's 3 stories tall. I generally stay away from them, but instead, I had to take a quick look, and I'm glad that I did. For individuals who have an opportunity to travel to Central America, there is a heavy emphasis on culture and people. But sometimes for the unsuspecting individual, it can be a bit of a culture shock. The ubiquitous mall offers a reminder of the modern shopping mall experience. For now, at least, malls here have exceptionally high occupancy rate with first-rate stores. Unless a certain Seattle, Washington state-based online retailer begins to make headways in Central America, I envision these stores being financially successful and remaining full. As the morning sun broke through the cloud cover, we were able to effectively get around the city using various rideshare apps, as well as the Transmetro line, with dedicated bus lanes, highly efficient, and extremely safe.
If Paseo Cayela is where the uber wealthy live in Guatemala City, then right here in Avenida Sexta or 6th Avenue is the heartbeat of where the Guatemalans or the Shopinos. This is where they come on the weekends. This is where they go shopping. This is where they catch up with their long lost friends and families. And as you can see, on a Sunday afternoon, this avenue, it's packed with friendly people just waiting to meet you as well.
In Zone 1 lies the historic 6th Avenue corridor. What was once a seedy, downtrodden section of town is quickly becoming revitalized. By closing off the main arterials and creating additional Transmetro lines, a very safe and effective pedestrian corridor is identifying with new residential development that is quickly filling in as property values increase. Nearby at Mercado Central, you can try your hand bartering for authentic Guatemalan paintings, textiles, ceramics, leather backpacks, or even folk art, all handmade. Or at the official Inguat Arts and Crafts store, similar items but priced slightly higher can be found in Zone 10 or the Hotel Zone. Here in Central Park, which is next to the 6th Avenue corridor, lies a smorgasbord of offerings, including the construction of a new outdoor performing arts theater and many different food vendors. Food here is unbelievably good and packs a lot of flavor. Much of it is grown or harvested with little pesticides and antibiotics, nor are they vastly genetically modified. Be aware of uncooked foods. The occasional stomach ache can be common with visitors.
Thousands of Guatemalans have come down to Park Central to explore, hang out, expose their children to stories in Spanish, to get some candy, to get some fresh fruit. And behind me is the National Palace, which is also the headquarters of the National Government of Guatemala, as well as a museum that is open for travelers and tourists alike to explore a lot of what the history of Guatemala has to offer right here.
I like to think of this as the quad, where all the points converge to a central point in Guatemala City. In addition to the presidential palace you see, there are various city government buildings and, of course, the federal buildings complex. This area is very lively during the day and the scene of celebrations on New Year's, Independence Day from Spain, as well as the occasional protests against anti-corruption and in support of better living and working conditions. I happened upon this unique bit of local flavor, a giant historic, antique, 100-year-old concrete relief map. For the map lover in all of us, it's not often one comes across a 19,000 square foot map of a country. From there, a quick ride-share app over, you can wrap up a visit to the city zoo, and from there, you could also explore the city's one and only active archaeological site, that of the Camino Huju Mayan Empire. I'm exerting a little bit of energy walking up a mound that once housed an altar on the outskirts of the city. Here lies the remains of the Camino Huju Mayan Empire, for which Guatemala City's basin calls home. Very little remains of the actual physical infrastructure, and what does was destroyed by modern-day development. Camino Huju's period of prominence was considered active from 1500 BC to 1200 AD, and included an ancient lakebed that was once utilized for an impressive array of canals to transport water. These canals provided life to a population that heavily traded with neighboring empires. Ancient examples of pottery and ceramic shards, along with obsidian used for cutting, lie everywhere, and it reminds one that life flourished here. Skeletal remains continue to be found, along with an impressive array being adorned with jade, shell necklace, and even jaguar skins. Dwindling water supplies, along with emerging evidence that the Mexican Aztec Teotihuacans destroyed Camino Huju, left the population further reduced. Those that remained eventually migrated to Copan in nearby modern-day Honduras. What makes Camino Huju remarkable is that this excavation began around in 1925, decades before Tikal National Park even started. Both the smaller museum here and the larger, newer Miraflores Museum do an impressive job of telling the story of life in pre-modern Guatemala. With each passing year, this archaeological park promises to be a jewel in the crown of this rapidly evolving city. As I wrap up my visit here in Guatemala City, I want to stress that inequality and chronic poverty continues. If I had a chance, I would share to American corporations, take a look at what the Northern Triangle countries have to offer. They are sure to find a very welcoming reception and commerce departments that will collaborate for a sustainable path forward. And lest I forget, doing such will reduce significantly the carbon footprint. Everyone all over our world has dreams, and yet if living conditions were to improve, many would like to remain right here with their families. But what do dreams know of boundaries? As for tourists, travel with purpose, walk a mile in the shoes of those who live here, converse with them, and contribute to the local economy. In my book, that is sure to please the Mayan gods.
Well, that's a little bit of an overview of what Guatemala City has to offer. There are many museums to choose from. There's zoos. There's even a movie theater here called Cinepolis, which offers seats that are like 4D, that move and everything. Until I bring you more stories from the Northern Triangle, I'm Ron Podmore. See you next time.